We're going to talk about dysfunctional families today. And that has a lot to do with leadership, by the way. When you have dysfunctional leadership, you have dysfunctional churches. So we want to incorporate both the family, leadership in the home, and leadership in the church together today, more so than perhaps we have in the past. Another story I find interesting was a research been done by, I forgot the name of the college right now, a few years ago. And the results of that, it says, certain scientists believe that they could see the future by watching 4-year-olds interact with a marshmallow. During a study, a researcher invited the children one by one into a plain room and began the gentle torment. You can have this marshmallow right now, he said, but if you wait while I run an errand, you can have 2 marshmallows when I get back. And then he left, and the torment began. Some children grabbed for their marshmallow the very minute he went out the door. Some lasted a few minutes before they gave in. But others were determined to wait. They covered their eyes. They put their heads down. They sang to themselves. They tried to play games or even fall asleep. When the researcher returned, he gave these children their 2 hand-earned marshmallows. And then science waited for these children to grow up. By the time the children reached high school, something remarkable had happened. A survey of the children's parents and teachers found that those who, as 4-year-olds, had the fortitude to hold out for the second marshmallow generally grew up to be better adjusted, more popular, adventurous, confident, and dependable teenagers. The children who gave in to temptation early on were more likely to be lonely, easily frustrated, and stubborn. They buckled under stress and shied away from challenges. And when some of the students in the 2 groups took the scholastic aptitude test, the kids who had held on longer scored an average of 210 points higher. Now I tell you that story because I know it's in the book, so you guys probably already read it, but I tell you that story because the point of that story that I want to elaborate on is probably, now this is a guess on my part, but having counseled professionally for 20 years, I think I can be pretty close to guessing right on this. I would imagine that 90% of those kids that couldn't wait grew up in dysfunctional families. Now we're going to define a dysfunctional family today. And we're going to talk about it because it's so important that we look in terms of leadership. And why do we have dysfunctional families? Why do we have dysfunctional elderships? Because if you have dysfunctional elderships, you're going to have a dysfunctional church. So they both carry over into what kind of leadership is being exercised, what kind of leadership the church is exercising and expressing, and what kind of leadership dads are in the home. So open your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. We talk a lot about this idea of the organism compared to the institution. So I won't spend a lot of time on that, of course, this morning. Other than the fact that we know the church is supposed to be an organism, and the main characteristic of an organism is that it's interdependent. As opposed to an organization that doesn't require interdependency. It requires cooperation, but it doesn't demand or require interdependency. It may have it, but it's not required. But an organism, if it's defined as an organism, has to be interdependent. And that's how Paul described it in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Let's read with me. I'm sorry about my voice. It's kind of crackly today. I think I've got a little bit of allergy going here, but just bear with me. The body is a unit, though it is made up of many parts, and though all its parts are many, they form one body. So it is with Christ. For we're all baptized by the one Spirit into the one body, whether Jews or Greeks, slave or free, and we were all given to one Spirit to drink. Now the body is not made up of one part, but of many. If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be part of the body. Let me stop here just for a moment. You can't separate a part of the body, one part of it being independent from the other, because that breaks up the very idea of an organism, a system. So once one party says, no, I'm not going to participate, I'm not going to work with this system of interdependency, then you've gotten a bit of a chink in the armor of the very organism that was supposed to be used in the first place. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong in the body, it would not for that reason cease to be part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has arranged the parts in the body, every one of them, just as He wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? In other words, how could the organism exist? How could the body exist? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker or indispensable are indispensable, and the parts that we think are less honorable we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has combined the members of the body and has given greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about interdependency yesterday and the value of it, and how there's a difference between, of course, the church, which is a body, which is an organism, and an institution. And I talked a lot about the fact that we have churches today and leadership today that's pushing the church towards an institution. And in defining an institution has to do with promoting itself and always adjusting to be supported by the culture. And you can see right away, if that's the case, that we find danger points if we are an institution and we're always adjusting to satisfy the culture. But that's how institutions exist, to one degree or another. Because if they don't, to some degree do that, eventually they fade away and are ignored. And so we ought to realize that the church is not to be culturally driven. Culturally sensitive, yes, but not culturally driven. And the home is the same way. If it's a Christian home, it should not be culturally driven. It can be culturally sensitive. There's a difference. Paul said, I became all things to all people that I might save some. He was culturally sensitive. But he never said he allowed his life to be totally controlled by culture. And the church cannot do that either. But when it comes to dysfunctional families, I'm going to give you 3 points that define a dysfunctional family. And then we'll look at each point individually and maybe do some introspection. It's been interesting teaching classes on this over several years. I've had people come up to me afterwards and said, you know, after taking that class and that course on the family, I didn't realize that I came from a dysfunctional family. I knew we had problems, but I didn't realize it was dysfunctional. Now you have defined it in a way that I can spot the dysfunctionality of my family, and now I'm working on the issues that have derived in my life from it. So, first of all, and I think it'd be good if you would write these down. You got it on the camera? He's got it on the camera, but first of all, and these are, I would say, pretty well agreed upon throughout the social scientific world. Number 1, lack of personal identity. Number 2, lack of communication skills.